Look no further. This is the Bowel Movement.
Welcome to the Powell Movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and this week my guest is another legend. And I know, you have to get sick of me saying I have a legendary guest, as that is the term that gets thrown around loosely in the world these days. But Brett Tippie is an absolute legend. This is a guy who was a pro snowboarder on a Burton roster that included riders like Craig Kelly. But not many remember him for his snowboarding, as Brett is looked at as one of the godfathers of freeride mountain biking. Brett has one of the bigger personalities that I've ever had on the show, and I think you're going to like it. Before we get into the podcast, I want to ask you to follow me on Instagram at The Powell Movement and support my amazing sponsors who make this show happen. They are Evo, Spy, Stanley, and the 10 Barrel Brewery. I want to keep these sponsors, and if that's going to happen, I really need you to use the codes in the ads to get the products that you're already going to buy. You're going to save 25% on Spy sunglasses. You'll save 30% on everything Stanley makes. You'll always get the best prices at Evo, and 10 Barrel is pretty tasty. That's enough about sponsors. Now, let's get into the life and times of Brett Tippie.
Hey, Mike, how are you, man?
I'm good, man. Thank you for making some time.
You betcha. Well, thanks for having me.
Oh, no problem, man. I think you just got back from a big trip to Peru, and then today you're heading up to Whistler?
I'm heading up to Whistler. Actually, I don't know if this is the bad dad or something I should say in the public, but I'm taking my girl out of school, and she's going to test a prototype Spawn 26-inch kids bike, and we're going to go sit at the bike park together.
That is not a bad dad at all. That is called teaching your kid outside of the classroom and letting them learn in the real world, and I think that's awesome.
I think so, too. That's what I say. So my wife and I discussed it, and she's getting good grades. So a little day like this now and then doesn't hurt anybody. We have some fun together.
Nice. How old's your kid?
My youngest daughter's 7 and my oldest daughter's 10.
Nice. I've got one that age as well at 10.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, pretty fun. And then you were in Peru, and that's got to be a pain in the ass leaving the family and going on these amazing trips that you go on. When you were single, it was probably easy to do, but now it's got to be tough.
Oh, you nailed it. You nailed it. You know what? I was pretty much a vagabond most of my life and just traveling and following storms for snow and as many different single tracks and free ride spots as I could on my bike and just like bouncing from good time to good time. And now I'm a family man and a dad. And I think I did 178 days on the road last year.
Jesus.
So if I didn't have my wife to hold it together, you know, she's the quarterback for our family and she's like super organized and a lot smarter than me. And she keeps it all together and allows me to actually go out and when I do work, have a good time, but it is work and I am away from my family. So it is definitely a balance of responsibility and good times. It's very much a bit of a struggle, but like I say, when I am working, it's usually like on the mic, having a good time and sharing the good times or shredding. So I can't really lose.
No, but I mean, that's almost more than an athlete would travel. I mean, you're talking about 6 months of the year you're on the road with 2 kids and a wife at home, which you got to do what you got to do, but it's also a challenge, I would say.
Yeah, for sure. You got to make hay while you can. But at the same time, I come home at the end of the summer and my kids are taller and grown. And a lot of these firsts, you know, these things have happened that I wasn't there for. And I don't know if you've ever heard the song by Tech Nine called The Rain. I recommend it. And it's about being on the road. And with him, it's music. And in the song, his daughter ends up rapping, wishing that she could produce music so she could spend more time with her dad. And he's always on the road and the fans love it because it makes for better music. But he's actually really missing his family. And it's very much a concern.
I totally understand that. And with you, I don't know you at all. I met you last year for a minute at Rampage, and I could tell that you were the dude who had legendary stories. I could tell that you were a guy who was going 110 miles an hour at all times, going in 40 directions, and you were someone I had to talk to for the Rampage podcast.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, and that was before I knew you were a Hall of Famer, one of the godfathers of freeride mountain biking, and a dude who has carried the title of Director of Good Times most likely since birth. So just seeing you and the big personality that you have, I knew you were someone. It was like, hey, I've got to talk to that guy. And in looking at your big personality and looking at your life, it's like your first 5 to 7 years of life, you were just moving, going everywhere. It seems like you're born in Vancouver, then you go to Calgary, then you move into the bush, then you go to Houston, Texas, and then you eventually settle on Kamloops. What was the deal with all the moves in your younger life?
Oh, wow. Well, my dad and mom were trying to find the place they wanted to be. And my dad was a teacher, so he was taking different teaching jobs here and there. And my mom was a nurse, so she could work anywhere she wanted. I did Vancouver for a number of years, and that wasn't it. And then my dad was originally from Alberta, so we went back there and did kindergarten and grade 1 there. And then I did 1 year in the bush, 2.5, 3 hours from anywhere. And it was a 1-room school with my dad teaching a bunch of loggers kids. And there was like 1 or 2 kids in each grade. So there was like 1 to 7 all in one room. It was kind of crazy.
Yeah.
And like Little House on the Prairies or something. And we're right on the edge of a beautiful lake in the middle of nowhere. And then we did Texas in 76. My dad went to a specialty art school. My mom was a nurse and nursed down there. Then we came back from the States. And then in 77, found Kamloops. And that just put all the pieces together. And we were there ever since.
I'm sure you were pretty young at this point, but is it tough going place to place and being the new kid, or are you so young it doesn't matter?
It's kind of tough moving into like Houston, Texas as a young Canadian kid. And I had like overalls and I wore moccasins. I was like a wannabe Davy Crockett. And I got a few eyebrows, but I coped by melding in with the kids. And I would try and find the local crazy kid and do whatever they did and more. And if they jumped 2 garbage pails on their bicycle, I'd jump 3. If they did 3, I'd do 4. Then all of a sudden I was in with the gang because I was like one of the cool crazy guys. And it's kind of a little bit of an alpha thing as a young kid, but without beating anybody up or fighting, it was like a way of mixing in and being accepted. So it was always about adrenaline and sports. And it was especially tough for me because my dad started me in school a year early and I was always a year younger than all my classmates. So I had to try twice as hard to be thought of as half as good. And it kind of changed my life, really, to try and excel and to try and measure up.
When you settle on Kamloops, I've met a bunch of Kamloopians. I don't know what you guys call yourselves. From what I gather, it's a blue-collar, pretty rough town. But that's when life gets normal for you. And what is normal in Kamloops?
I got there in 1977, grade 4, and I wasn't a big guy. I was an average-sized kid. I was a little bit younger than everyone else. So it was, like you say, a blue-collar town, lots of ranchers, lots of miners, sawmills, and, a lot of tough kids because their parents were tough and they were tough. And we got cold winters and hot summers, so a lot of gnarly seasons and a lot of outdoors people. And so that rubbed off on the sports. And it's also the tournament capital of BC because it is so central. And there's a lot of team sports going on. So my parents got me in every single sport that you could probably imagine, from baseball to hockey to basketball to rugby to archery to wrestling to karate. And anything I ever wanted to try, they let me do. And they really let me test my feet in a lot of different waters, as well as I got as many bicycles and dirt bike and anything I ever really wanted. They weren't rich. They were a teacher and a nurse, but they did what they could, and they sacrificed to let me try as many different sports. And I think it really taught me a good team ethic, but I also learned a lot of individual sports. And the terrain in Kamloops is absolutely amazing because it used to be a lake. And so there's a river going down the valley now. And what used to be a lake is all these crazy formations. It looks like the Squaw Valley Palisades or like Disease Ridge on Whistler. It's just like shoots and drops and everything. So as kids, we would just run up these things and dive down them. We'd have races down them on our feet and then on our bicycles and then up and down them on dirt bikes. And I was really lucky to be raised in that place, and that it had crazy terrain and a really tough mentality of people who worked hard and played hard.
And you grew up in a time where it was like, come home at dark.
Yeah. Totally. It was like 70s free range parenting. You know what I mean? Like we didn't wear seatbelts or helmets, It
was do whatever you want.
Exactly. You'd be on top of your parents' Mustang surfing down the road because they thought it was cool.
Your parents let you do that?
Well, my uncle did, yeah.
Okay. I was like, my parents never thought that was cool, I don't think.
My dad would hit like runaway lanes and stuff in his Mustang, and we'd go up them as far as we could and stuff.
No way. I've never done that.
Oh, yeah, it was cool. Some of them were pretty deep gravel, so you actually couldn't go that far, but some of them you could hammer up these things, and you'd get me and my cousins, and we'd get them worked into a cool froth, and we'd like fire up these runaway lanes and stuff. It was pretty rad.
Yeah. And with you have First Nation blood in you, and in the U.S., there's stereotypes, discrimination, and free college, and it's kind of all messed up. Do you have to deal with any bullshit in Canada?
I was never raised on the res. A lot of my friends are from the res, and I was like a few blocks from the res in a regular neighborhood. My mom is of First Nations descent, and I'm definitely dark colored, but I was raised as just a regular kid. And some of my friends are fully from the res, and I walked to school with them and stuff, but I never really had to deal with much of that.
Good.
I unfortunately don't have any cultural connections, or I don't have status or anything, so I don't get free college for my kids or anything. Although a couple of my uncles have lined it up, so I might be able to do that in the future if I do some homework. But yeah, I've just been kind of like a regular kid.
You're just a Canadian. First Nation didn't impact you either way, positive, negative?
Not really, no. You know, like some of my friends would call me an apple because I was red on the outside and white on the inside.
I've never heard that term before. You had a couple nicknames like Indian Muscles and Headbutt because you would knock people out with your headbutts, and on the football field, you were just a force.
Well, that was really quite fortunate for me because I was a year younger than everybody. And so when I tried out for the football team, I wanted to do my best, and I got in there and I would just go full tilt into anybody and anybody. I was fearless, and I know they don't play football like that anymore because the coaches would get arrested, and there was a lot of spearing going on, and I would lead with my head and tackle with my head. I'd do a good rap with my arms too to bring people down, but I could literally go head to head with guys 2, 3, 4 years older than me, would sometimes come back for alumni coaching, and there's numerous people that I knocked out or had them on the ground doing the chicken. It was kind of scary, and I could line people up and just take them on head to head, and I would barely even see stars, and people would be like doing backflips. And all of a sudden I realized that I had a really hard head and I was quite tough, and I became quite feared. And I was a very polite, well brought up kid, but I kind of enjoyed that because then all of a sudden I was cool with the gang. And then I was like hanging out with pretty girls, and I eventually became captain of the defense on the football team. It was something that gave me a lot of confidence and respect as a young man. And since then I've broken a lot of helmets mountain biking. Over a couple dozen helmets, you know, in the decades that I've been riding, and I've been lucky enough to never have a concussion that I know of anyways. Knock on wood right now. But I learned that in football, that if you're going to get hit, it's better to hit someone than get hit. And if you're going to take a hit, then get your molars set solid, because that stops you from getting that boxer's soft chin, you know, get your molars set and then just take it. And I don't know, it's something that's always stuck with me. And I have fond memories of my football coach who taught us all how to stand and be cool, and how to hit, and how to be a gentleman, and how to win like a gentleman, and how to lose like a gentleman. And I take my football days into my present right now, and I'm quite happy with what I've learned.
You seem like a guy who's got a ton of energy. I won't say ADD because I don't know anything about you like that, but you seem like you got a lot of shit going on. And I would think that makes school a challenge for a kid like you who's got a lot of energy. How do you do in school?
You know what? I do have a lot of energy. I'm kind of stuck like this. I don't know why I do, but I just do.
It's a gift.
I'm just really positive. And I found school quite easy because my dad was an English teacher, and my dad was a super smart fellow. I wasn't great with numbers. I wasn't great in math, although I did good in algebra and physics. But everything else came pretty easy. And my dad would not force me, but he would, you know, have me disciplined enough to do my homework and get my projects in time with all my random energy. But yeah, I got fairly good grades. And so even though I had a lot of energy, I had enough discipline to channel it when I had to get by.
Was there any thought of college or playing football in college after high school? What was your plan?
Well, right out of high school, I actually was lucky enough to get a invitation to the BC Lions Junior Development Camp, which is a professional football team tryout right out of high school. And they pulled some of the top high school players out to come and test us out. And I went there. I got ranked the second best defensive player in the whole camp.
Whoa.
And I was only like 180 pounds. And like I said, I was fearless. I would go head to head with these guys that were 250 pounds, but they literally told me that I was too small. And I basically, between the lines, had to get on roids and do a lot of lifting.
Really?
And I was like, well, I'm not into that. So I totally quit. And I did do 1 year of college at a college that didn't have a football team. And I got the best grades I ever got because I actually paid for the schooling.
Right.
I got pretty much straight A's. But snowboarding had got my number by then, and I was heavily addicted. And I ended up snowboarding for the next year. And then I moved to Sunshine Village, which back then was the only major hill in Canada that allowed snowboarding. And I moved there and got a job as a lifty and trail crew, and I started snowboarding full on.
This is a time where people aren't snowboarding full on. You don't have full metal edges at that point. It's pretty early gear, and it's you and Craig Olsen snowboarding back then, right?
Well, back then, yeah, like I started snowboarding in 83, And I never really met another snowboarder except for my friend Craig Olson and I. And we would convert people into snowboarders. And then we just kind of started a gang in our hometown of snowboarders. And it wasn't until I moved to Sunshine Village that I met another snowboarder that I didn't convert. And I met Alex Warburton and Greg Cheeseball Daniels and Neil DeFern and
Alex Warburton, like the legendary engineer?
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
from Yes Snowboards.
Okay.
Ken Ochenbach and Dave Ochenbach, Don Schwartz, a bunch of the early guys riding in Sunshine because that's the only hill that really allowed it. So I went out there and I had a Burton Elite 150. So I moved on from the homemade boards that I made in the 83, 84.
Because you were making homemade boards and like taking them in gravel pits and on the mountain.
Yeah, right away. Like for some reason, I really love carving gravel. And there wasn't always enough snow down low in Kamloops. So Craig Olson and I would rip our prehistoric snowboards down gravel pits and sand pits. I started snowboarding in 83, but I started gravel boarding in 83 as well.
I mean, that's just crazy. That's just saying, hey, I want to bleed today.
Well, you know what? You bled a little bit, but then you get good. It really taught you to like stand on your board, stand on your feet, and do it because otherwise you bled.
Yep.
Ironically enough, in 1990, I got a poster in ISM, International Snowboard Magazine, a pull-up poster for Boardhead's clothing, dropping like a 12-foot cliff on my Burton PJ in gravel, in sand. So I was dropping this 12-foot cliff for the camera and landing it, just kind of landing a little bit back on the tail so the nose wouldn't grab. And I got a pull-up poster, and oh, did I feel cool.
Was that the Kokanee Sandblast, or was that something different?
No, that was different. But they mentioned that I won the Kokanee Sandblast in 1990, I think it was, yeah. And so I went up there, and I'd already done a lot of sandboarding. So I won the race, and I carved it up for the cameraman who was filming for Warren Miller the day before the race, and I was just slashing turns down the pit and practicing. And then I won the race, but he was reloading his 16mm Bolex camera, so he didn't get shots of me actually winning the race.
Oh.
So I was super bummed, and I said, hey, am I going to be in the movie, the Warren Miller movie? I'd seen a lot of ski movies and went there every fall with everyone else to get stoked.
Yeah.
For many years. And he goes, well, I don't know, man. Everything's got to make it past the editing room floor. And a lot of my friends were into speed skiing at the time. So I said, well, you know what? I'm going to go up and I'm going to straight line this hill. And he's like, excuse me? I go, I'm going to go straight line the hill. It was like a 600, 700, 800-foot gravel sand pit. I couldn't quite remember. It was the banks of the Nechako River. He's like, well, you don't have to do that. I go, I'm going to do it anyways, dude. So you might as well film it. And he's like, okay. And so I went up to the top and I straight lined from the start to the finish when the slalom was taken down. And I basically straight lined 80% of this giant sand pit. And then I went into a giant hillside turn to slow down. And then I kind of stopped, skipped out, and kind of ate shit right into the ditch that was filled with straw bales. And then I stood up. I had no shirt on and I threw the horns. And then when I finally went to go see the movie, I took my little brother and I was all excited to be in my first Warren Miller movie, winning the race. But at least I carved up the hill, and I thought there'd be some footage of that, or at least straight lining this giant hill. And when I got there, the segment went, and I got to the end of the segment, and there was no footage of me. And the song was winding down, and all of a sudden he said, some people got rocked and stoned and ground down to size. And then the final shot was me just hitting the ditch. And he didn't even show me straight line the whole hill or carve it up with giant GS turns. It was just me hitting the ditch. Then the segment ended and went on to the next segment. And I was like looking at my brother, and he's looking at me, and he's like, oh, dude, that's not cool. And I was like, oh, my God, I got Warren Miller. I'm never shooting with that guy ever again. And I never did. And then I went on to shoot with Greg Stump, and I felt way cooler.
Yeah, I mean, that is just a Warren Miller thing to do. He's going down the mountain and into the hay bale. Wow, that was fun.
Yeah, thanks a lot, buddy.
Yeah. Are you biking at this time, too? Because we haven't talked about biking, and that's your career that we're going to talk about a bit, or we're just going to talk about your life, really. But snowboarding's pretty serious. You had to get into bikes, I would think, pretty early as well.
I was always biking. Like, I was on a tricycle at 2 or 1.5 or 2 or whatever. And then my first bicycle was a girl's bicycle from my cousin. But at least it was painted blue. My dad painted it blue for me because it had a low top tube, girl's bike. But it was painted blue by the time I saw it. So I liked it. And I rode a 10-speed, and I rode a BMX bike, and I rode a dirt bike. So I was always biking. But I didn't try mountain biking until 83, the same year I started snowboarding.
Gravel pit mountain biking?
You know what? I took my bike down sand pits and clay hills and all the hills in behind my parents' place that I was raised in. My mom still lives in, actually. And there's a little mixture of everything: sand, clay, regular dirt. There's even some rocks and stuff that we rode down. So I was accidentally free riding ever since I started, because that's just what's around the back hills of Kamloops. And I was into it. So I was actually more of a snowboarder than I ever really was a biker for much of my life and career. And to be honest with you, secretly, even though I know we're on the record, I'm a diehard snowboarder that mountain bikes still. Even though my career is mountain biking, I am addicted to snowboarding, and I love mountain biking, but I'm 51% a snowboarder and 49% a mountain biker.
It's hard to replicate the feeling of a deep powder day on anything.
Yeah, a deep powder day trumps all. But one leads the other. And with the seasons, they go hand in hand. So I guess mountain biking feeds my family, and I love mountain biking. So when I'm mountain biking, then I guess I am more of a mountain biker. But I still honestly don't know if I'm a snowboarder that mountain bikes or a mountain biker that snowboards.
Now it is time for me to take a quick sponsor break. And the first one up is Evo. And all winter I've been telling you that there is no better place to get your ski and snowboard gear. And that's true. The folks at Evo stores in Denver, Seattle, Portland, and Whistler live and breathe the sports they sell. And now that it's spring, it's time to think about your bike. And whether you need service or a brand new bike, Evo has you taken care of. They have the best brands, offer great service, and they know what they're talking about. If bike isn't your thing, Evo is also the best one-stop shop for surf and wake. If you can't make it to a store, Evo.com offers the best user experience in action sports, free shipping on orders of $50 or more, and a low price guarantee. You can find out all about the brands, the events, Evo trip, and a whole lot more over at Evo.com. My next sponsor is another iconic Seattle brand. I'm talking about Stanley. Remember that green steel bottle that your grandpa took to the mountains? The one that kept his coffee hot all day long? That's a Stanley. And since 1913, they have been the pioneers of retaining cold and heat. No product works for 48 hours like a Stanley. And to celebrate camping and drinking season, I convinced the folks at Stanley to let me give 30% off site-wide to show listeners. It's a limited time offer. To get it, you need to head over to stanley-pmi.com, buy a growler, some pint glasses, a legendary bottle, whatever, and enter the code POWEL30, that's all one word with the number 30, at checkout, and you will get 30% off site-wide. Those are my sponsors. For a kid who's probably taking his bikes in the woods and riding his little girl's bike everywhere, I wouldn't think in the 80s the bikes are strong enough to handle anything that you're doing.
You know what? I've broken so many bikes and folded rims and snapped bars and broken cranks off and broken pedals off. And I've pretty much destroyed almost every single bike I've ever had up until recently. Even years when I was riding Rocky Mountains, I'd break 1 to 3 Rockies a year. Now I ride for YT, and I haven't broken one YT since I've been riding for them. I'm in my 3rd year, which is awesome because I can trust them to do whatever. But back then, it was really much pioneering a lot of stuff because we didn't know what the bikes could take, and we're trying to do things. And, I was riding off loading docks 4 or 5 feet to flat back in the day, and bikes would take it for a little while, and then they'd fold. And then some of these shoots that we were trying in these drops, and I remember Wade Simmons and I would be sending drops, 8 feet, 10 feet, 15 feet, 20 feet drops, and the bikes would just blow up sometimes, and you'd end up ragdolling down these hills, and then you'd take it back in and try something else or try a different wheel manufacturer or whatever. So we helped change bicycle technology by just destroying the bikes and a little bit of ourselves.
Yeah, I can imagine. So that's how you get into biking a little bit. I'm going to still talk about snowboarding a little bit more because in 91, you meet up with Craig Kelly, and it's a chance encounter, but I believe that lights a fire under you to start a race career in snowboarding?
Well, I had already been racing amateur, and I've been hitchhiking around because I didn't have a vehicle. So I hitchhiked around BC, 89 and 90. I got a bunch of podiums and won a few races in BC.
And these are all hard boot setups?
No, I was still in soft boots, and I competed a lot with Ross Rebagliati, who went on to win the gold medal in the first snowboarding Olympics in GS in Nagano in 98, and a fellow named Jacob Best, who appeared in a Craig Kelly movie up in Powder King in Board with the World, I think, and that was one of my buddies. And we were all stoked that one of our racing buddies, Jacob Best, was in a Craig Kelly movie, Adventure Scope, and I would hitchhike around these races and was loving it, but it was a lot for fun. And then I actually was at Red Mountain in 91, and I was walking along the street and I saw Craig Kelly. I thought it looked like Craig Kelly. It was kind of some guy that had a big nose, and there was like a 4-wheel drive Subaru with a 2-liter rack in behind him. And I'm like, oh my God, that is Craig Kelly. And I'm like, Craig. And he looked up and it was definitely Craig. And I'm like, dude, what are you doing? He's like hunched over in the snow looking around. He goes, I'm looking for my keys for the last 15 minutes. And I go, those ones right there? And he looks over to his left, and over against the curb, like in a little hollow, was like his keys. And he's like, dude, oh my God. And he grabbed his keys and he threw his arm around me and he said, hey, can I buy you a beer? And I'm like, sure. And so then Craig Kelly marched me into the hotel they were staying. Then we went up to his hotel room where his wife was, and Keith Duckboy Wallace and Steve Matthews and all the Burton team. And I ended up drinking beer with these guys, and eventually said bye and some high fives and took off. And the next day I was on the mountain and I was ripping down Granite Share, and eventually ran into Craig in the lineup, and he goes, dude, you're that guy that helped me find my keys. I just watched you ride down the lift line and you were shredding, dude. Oh my God, you're fast. You should race. You were doing like GS turns down through the slope. And I was like, yeah, well, I do race a little bit. He goes, no, you should race pro, dude. And I'm like, really? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, oh, wow. And I go, I don't have a speech or anything. He goes, I'll sell you mine, dude. He goes, you got to come to the next race. And I was like, well, maybe I will. And so, I didn't have much money at the time. And I was tree planting in the summers, for 15 cents a tree. And I had a Volkswagen van that I sold, and I took all the money and I invested it to go to the next race. And there he was with the speed suit, and he brought me the speed suit and he sold it to me for $150. And the little thing goes for like $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 or whatever. He sold me the speed suit that he won the U.S. Open in.
Awesome.
And that he was in the Smooth Groove movie with on the Burton M8.
No way.
Up. I still actually have that suit.
That's so cool.
And then I ended up racing him. I think it was an OP Pro. It was the next big race. Anyways, all the big guys were there. And I ended up beating him the first run in the GS. So we were in the lineup for the second run, and they did it in the order of your time from the first run. And so we're right beside each other in the lineup because I got 10th, he got 11th in the first run. And then we had a bet for $10 on the second run. And then he ended up beating me on the second run, and he got 10th overall, and I got 11th. He got me by like 4/100ths of a second or something. But, it was kind of like a bonding moment and some high fives. And he's like, I told you should race. And I'm like, dude, I'm doing this. So I ended up hitting a bunch of races, and I ended up getting 7th overall on the U.S. Pro GS circuit. And I had just converted to hard boots full on. And I just said, you know what, I'm going to do this racing thing, and I'm going to use hard boots for everything because I want to be natural on the course. And so I use hard boots, riding powder, riding bumps, free riding, gravel boarding, everything. I just use hard boots for the next 10 years, every single day.
That is crazy. When was the last time you were on a hard boot setup?
Oh, God. You know what? I used them up until 2001, 2002. And then I kind of stopped snowboarding for a while because I got heavily into partying and stopped biking and everything for a number of years. And so I used soft boots from like up to about 2001, 2002, I think.
So you're the last guy on the hill with a bomber setup.
Yeah. And I started snowboarding again after I got out of rehab in 2007, but I didn't have any soft boots. I had lost mine. So I used hard boots again. And my first time snowboarding again, I think I was on a borrowed prior 180 powder board. And then I dug up one of my old 1993 Rosignol Race 173s race board with hard boots. And I free rode it on that for a while until then I discovered Burton Driver X boots, which are quite stiff. And then I converted back to soft boots again. So I kind of jumped around from soft boots to hard boots for a long time.
So snowboarding is probably your first venture into wearing spandex, which is weird because you would think maybe it would happen in the bike world, but in the snowboard world first. Yeah,
no, totally. I wore Craig Kelly's speed suit in 1991.
You got into Craig Kelly's pants, man. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, funny enough. Well, the funniest story with Craig is that I kind of almost pretty much beat him up. We were friends, but we had a full-on wrestling match. And, well, let me just tell you the story. It's quite funny. After he told me that I should race, he invited me to come film with him. Pretty cool because the year before, they'd filmed my friend Jacob Best in Powder King. And he got in the movie in the opening scene up in Powder King. And they invited me, and I'm at Red Mountain, and there was tons of powder, and I knew all the lines. And he invited me to come film with them. But they told me to meet me down in the next city, down below Roslyn, where I was living, in Trail, because there was all these stairways that had roofs over them, and there was like 2-3 feet of powder on these roofs. And so he told me to meet them the next morning at 9 a.m. by the main staircase. So I was there an hour early. I waited for 4 or 5 hours. I waited till like afternoon, and they never showed up. It was like minus 22, and I was frozen, and I was so psyched and eager, and I sat there for 4 or 5 hours. And then when they never showed up, I went, well, I guess they're not interested in filming this, you know? And I had brought a photographer because I'd never really shot with many photographers before. But I brought one of my friend's dads who was an amateur photographer. And so we ended up riding some of these roofs that had snow on them, and then we left. And I was kind of bummed that I didn't get to be in a Burton movie, and those guys weren't interested in filming it. And then I had a New Year's Eve party that night. And so I'm rocking away at my New Year's Eve party. And so I had just tried acid for my third time. And so I'm peaking on acid at my New Year's Eve party when Craig Kelly walks in with the Burton team. And first thing Craig says is, he goes, hey, did you ride those roofs? And I was like, yeah. And he grabbed me by the shoulder and he kneed me in my thigh. He gave me a giant Charlie horse.
And you're tripping.
And I'm tripping. And all of a sudden I didn't know what to do. So I just grabbed him because he just kneed me so hard in my thigh. And I grabbed him by the head and threw him in a headlock. And then I ran him into my fridge. Not really hard, but like hard enough to let him know that I had him, right? Like I ran him into the fridge and then bonked his head into the fridge. And then he tried to get up and I just squeezed him as hard as I could. And I held him there to let him know that I had him. This is my hero. I'm like headlocking my hero, and I just ran his head into the fridge. And I'm peaking on acid, so everything's really strange at the time. I'd only tried it a couple times before, and I only tried it so many times, period. But I let him up, and he's up, and his eyes all water, and he's like, dude, we went to film those things, and you tracked it. And I'm like, oh my God, you guys came. I waited for 5 hours. You never showed up because I didn't think you're interested. I didn't mean to poach you. Oh my God, this is a nightmare. And so I'm peeking. I just ran Craig Kelly's head into the fridge. And then I found out that I poached him, but I didn't think they were interested in filming that. And so I didn't mean to poach him. So I explained everything. And then he went, oh, dude, I get it. I'm sorry. That's how you're being a dick. And you just did it for spite. And I was like, no, I just didn't think you were interested. Oh my God, this is horrible. Anyways, we ended up high-fiving each other, and they didn't have time to get to the beer store. So I had a bunch of beer. We ended up drinking and hanging out, and then we became friends. And they said that they were hungover from the night before, and they didn't come film until later in the afternoon. I had already left, so it was pretty much a nightmare, but it turned out to be all right.
Well, that's you snooze, you lose for Craig Kelly because you got it and he didn't.
Yeah, well, I got the fresh tracks. And so I felt so bad about it because that was my hero. I ended up hand-painting him a T-shirt that I brought to the Mount Baker Bank Slalom, and I gave to him, and it's a shot of him. I think it's a Bud Fawcett shot of him doing a giant toe turn and just like laying it right over. And I gave it to him as an apology, and he accepted my apology, and we were friends from then on. And then years and years later, just a couple of years ago, Kelly Jo Legaz, his ex-wife, gave it back to me. And I have that T-shirt again right here. So he kept it all that time.
That is so cool.
And then I wore it around at the Mount Baker Bank Slalom on the 30th annual. And as well as I wore his speed suit at the 30th annual, and I got duct tape in Masters. I got third wearing his speed suit.
Oh, sick. At this point, we're probably around 94ish. I think you were sponsored by Burton. I don't know if you're getting free boards, money, or anything, but I think they ended up hooking you up with some stuff. But you're also getting more into bikes at this point, riding with Richie Schley and Wade Simmons when you're not snowboarding?
I knew Richie Schley ever since elementary school, and I hadn't met Wade yet for a number of years before that. But yeah, I got sponsored by Burton in 94, and sorry to stick with the snowboarding, but it was funny enough that a friend of mine, Victoria Jalouse, who I dated in high school.
That's crazy.
Who I got onto a race board in 1991 as well. I got her to step into my Burton PJ6 in her ski boots. And she tried snowboarding one time before with her, eventually, who became her coach, Rob, but she'd never tried a carving board. I stepped her into an alpine board, and she was railing her first time because she grew up as a ski racer. And I don't know why she wasn't on the national team, because there was girls on the national Canadian ski team that had never beaten Victoria, but she got hurt at different times, and it never really worked out for her to become a national team ski racer. But she stepped into my board and started railing, and she went, oh my God, I love that feeling. And so she got heavily into it, and she got sponsored by Burton, and she ended up, I think, getting third in the Mont Saint Anne World Cup. And then I got the second fastest training time. The U.S. coach had told me that my time was the second fastest training time. I ended up blowing it in the race. I got 22nd. But anyways, I beat all the Burton team in the training runs. And then I sent them some sandboarding videos and some gravel boarding videos. And they put me on the team in 94. So I got free boards for a while. Then they gave me some money for travel and whatnot.
Is this Canadian team or team?
This is the international team.
Okay, big deal.
There was a lot of riders on the international team at that time, though, so it wasn't as big a deal as I would like to make it sound. But I was still riding for Burton, and they sent me boxes and boxes and boxes of stuff, which blew my mind back then, and like so many boards. And it was kind of hard because I never knew which board to use because I had so many different widths and flex patterns, and it was quite challenging to pick the right board always. But my career for mountain biking kind of got kickstarted by riding for Burton, and my friend Christian Beijing, who I knew from 1991 in Roslyn, and I was the first snowboarder who ever filmed for a little movie called Alpine Commando that had skiing and snowboarding in it. He was given a job to film me for Burton for an Adventure Scope movie. And when he came to Kamloops, we had, I wouldn't call it a Chinook, but it was kind of like a warm spell. And all the powder that we had disappeared by the time he arrived. And so we didn't want to go film in the slush. And he didn't know what to do. And he's kind of scratching his head. And I said, dude, bring your camera. We're going to go to the gravel pits, and I'm going to carve up the gravel pits on my snowboard. And he's like, what? And I'm like, dude, this is where we mountain bike. Because I showed him some late 80s mountain bike footage of me and my friends doing some stuff and talked to him about coming to film us, but it never happened. But in 94, we went to the gravel pits, and I sacrificed my Burton PJ6, beautiful, sweet board, and I started carving up the gravel pits, put on a red t-shirt so I'd pop for the camera, and had a mullet going on. And I had a Toyota 4x4, and we just shuttled these gravel pits. And I was dropping like drops and doing shoots and little couloirs and laying it over because I, for years, had trained for giant slalom for racing on my gravel board because I couldn't afford to go to New Zealand or go to Argentina or to the Pizzatol Glacier or wherever all my competitors were training. I just went and rid gravel pits. So I was pretty dialed on my board, pretty much like Rocky hitting slabs of beef. Training just any way he could. And so I did a bunch of GS turns for him, gravel boarding. And Jake Burton said it was his favorite part of the movie, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, for the Burton movie that year. And so I got like a short clip. It was under a minute, but it's just shots of me carving it up on the GS board down these gravel pits. And so then the next year, Christian was hired by Greg Stump to make a mountain bike movie. So he came to Kamloops, and I had heard that he was coming to Kamloops to film this movie, and I had kind of set it up because a friend of mine, Richie Slay, who was a BMXer, I seen do 360s in and out of the skate bowl, and Greg Stump came and asked me after snowboarding one day, the bottom of Blackcomb, hey, do you know a mountain biker who can do a 360? And I said, well, my buddy Richie Slay can do 360s on a BMX. I'm sure he could do it on a mountain bike. He goes, okay, thanks. So then I was out the next summer in the bush tree planting when I heard that Christian Beijing, my buddy, was coming to film Richie Slay do a 360 for a Greg Stump mountain bike movie. And I'm like, oh my God, I have to poach this. And so I was actually in a tent with two girls. I thought it was going to be my first threesome because we were all on mushrooms and making out, and they were making out, and all three of us were taking turns kissing each other.
Wow, this is a good story.
And then all of a sudden I heard Craig Olson go, Tippie, we're going to town. We're leaving in 10 minutes. If you want to ride, meet me at the main tent. We're going. You got 10 minutes, Tippie. And I heard this from my tent, and I'm like, oh my God. I go, girls, I have to go. And they're like, what? I go, I have to go. And they're like, no, but we're going to, we want to. And I go, where do you have to go? And I go, I'm going to be in a mountain bike movie. And they're like, oh, wow. Well, okay. And so I ran out of the tent, and I jumped in the vehicle before Craig Olson and his girlfriend left. And I got a ride into town. And I woke up the next morning. We went and watched Richie do his 360. And then after he did his 360, they said, well, let's film something else. And I go, I got some stuff for you guys. And they're like, oh, what have you got? And I go, let's go ride some steeps. And they're like, steeps? I go, yeah. And so I took them to the hills in behind my parents' house. And Craig Olson and I started dropping gnarly steeps. These 50-degree shoots and big faces.
Stuff Christian hadn't seen before.
No, it blew his mind. And we were supposed to use Specialized bikes because that was the company that Greg Stump was making the movie for. So I put it aside my own mountain bike and I grabbed one of these Specialized bikes, and they're a size small. And I'm a big guy and I'm on the size small, tiny little hardtail. And I'm pointing it down these 50-degree steeps and riding them out like bucking bronco, hammering back and forth, up and down, back end, swapping all over. And I rode out this one gnarly line. It was a fresh line. And I ended up running the bike into a ditch at the bottom. And I bent the front wheel right into the frame and bent the forks in half and handed back the bike after riding this thing out. And Christian was just speechless. He turned off the bullet camera and he turns it off and he goes, "Oh my God, that was sick." He goes, "Okay, Tippie, you're in the movie." So they had a red one and a black one, these little Specialized M2s. So then we had one bike left. So we all took turns on the one bike doing different gnarly lines after I destroyed the first one. So that became a movie called Pulp Traction, which became a cult classic. And that was the first movie that had Freeride in it. You know, like there was some cross country and stuff, different parts on it. But
there's a stomp style and
yeah,
a different kind of movie, you know, because he was making some unique stuff back then where there wasn't that much unique stuff going on.
Exactly. So it kind of showed the world a little bit of Freeride and put it on the map, you know. And then the next year, Christian made his own movie. It was a multi-sport movie called Tao of Riding. And he invited me, Richie, and Craig Olson to do some more riding. And we'd start dropping cliffs, bigger cliffs, and doing some shoots and some gravel pit action. And then the next year, we did Kranked. And that's when I met Wade Simmons, because Rocky had put money into the movie and Marizuki. And Wade was like a Canada Cup downhiller and a BMXer, and he kind of converted into Freeride, and they put him into the movie. And that was the first Freeride movie that really caught on and hit the masses. And then it went terminal and created the hysteria. But it wasn't the first, but it was the first one that really went big.
Well, with Stump's movie, though, with Pulp Traction, did that movie not even make it out because of the name? Because I think there was some controversy in the legal team of maybe Specialized saying, hey, we can't totally rip off Quentin Tarantino here. And did Pulp Traction ever make it to the masses, or was it like an underground hit?
Well, it was delayed for a bit. There was a misconception that it never got released, but it did get released, but it wasn't until later. You had to do like a re-edit, and you know, I don't know what people were smoking back then, but even Stump himself doesn't quite remember what happened, but I remember because I was there. Although I smoked a bit of weed too. But what happened was that it wasn't because of the Quentin Tarantino ripoff so much. They had a little bit of legal action to deal with there. But it was more so the off-trail stuff, that the free riding we did in Kamloops. And the Sierra Club and a lot of people were up in arms about riding off-trail. They said, you know what? We're going to get a lot of backlash from this. You have to take all that out. And so Stumpy said, oh, I have to remake the movie? And they said, yeah, I have to remake the movie. And he's like, okay, well, give me the other money that you owe me, the other 40 grand that I'll remake the movie. They went, okay. So they gave him another 40 grand. And he went, you know what? See you later. There's the movie. The movie's awesome. It's done, and that's it. And they went, oh, you're screwing us. And he goes, yeah, that's right. But he eventually did make a recut that had a disclaimer at the beginning. And it's basically the same movie, but he put a little disclaimer at the beginning. But he kept it going.
If that movie comes out right when it's supposed to, and that footage is seen by the masses maybe 2 years earlier than the next movie that makes it to the masses, does that help the progression of mountain biking right away?
I think it did a little bit. Yeah, it got the ball rolling, and you know, I got a lot of hate for that, a lot of backlash. People were like up in arms about riding off trail, and oh, how could you do this and put it on camera? And there was a lot of staunchy old school mountain bikers who I understand were fighting for land access in their prospective areas, so I can get it. But you know, where we're from, Kamloops, there's dirt bikers and guys riding quads and rednecks trying to drag race their trucks up hills everywhere, right? So you could do whatever you wanted around there. And we rode in a lot of areas that were specially designated for off-road use. And so you see some guy doing donuts with his Chevy pickup, riding your bike down a hill didn't seem that bad compared to some guy, you know, ripping up there on a CR 500.
Totally.
Either, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so we weren't thinking about that. In Kamloops, we could do what we wanted, especially in these areas that were deemed acceptable for that. And so then people from like different areas, a lot in the States, Marin County and whatnot, were like up in arms because they were fighting for land access in their areas. And we didn't really realize that. So I see the whole picture now with more wisdom and experience and knowing more than I knew then. But we were just like a bunch of young dudes going, whatever, dude, rip it, man, grip it and rip it.
Sometimes it takes young punk kids to kind of push the envelope to make change.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, there was a bunch of the crazy things going on there, but the movement had started, and I was just glad to be a part of it.
Now I'm going to take a final sponsor break, and Spy Optic is celebrating its 25th anniversary. Yes, 25 years Spy has been crushing it with innovation and style. Based out of Southern California, Spy is a collective of athletes, artists, and product designers who live and breathe action sports. To celebrate this 25th anniversary, Spy is re-releasing the MC3, an ode to Jeremy McGrath's original MC sunglass. The Dirty Mo 2 is a sick update to Dale Jr.'s original Dirty Mo, and the Scoop 2 celebrating Spy's OG Scoop sunglass, which started it all. To get 20% off your Spy purchase, head on over to spyoptic.com, place your order, and then at checkout, enter the code TPM20, that's all one word. To find out more about the products and the brand, head on over to spyoptic.com. My final sponsor is the 10 Barrel Brewery out of Bend, Oregon. They have been brewing the Northwest's best beer since 2006, and they encourage everyone to go drink some of their beer outside. Why? Because 10 Barrel is all about the outside. They live and breathe the snow and bike lifestyle, and they support it with events, sponsored athletes, movie projects, and more. Next time you're at the store, pick up some 10 Barrel. And to find out more about the beer that supports action sports, the events, and their pubs, head on over to 10barrel.com. Those are my sponsors, and now we'll get back into the podcast. By the time Kranked comes out, that's really what puts everything on the map globally.
It did, yeah.
But at that point, I think you're living up in Whistler. You're summertime snowboarding. You're camping out on the glacier so you don't have to buy lift tickets. You're still dirtbagging it. But when Kranked comes out, I would think that changes everything for you as a person, career, everything.
Yeah, I was camping up on the glacier. No, in the glacier, but like in the woods beside the bottom of the 7th Avenue chairlift. That was back in like 89.
You and Bears?
Yeah, me and the Bears. I was like camping in the woods, and I was just trying to extend every dollar, you know. Like I was pretty poor. And by the time Kranked came around, all of a sudden I got sponsored. I was pretty much almost 30. And then I got sponsored by Rocky Mountain and Giro with a couple of fat contracts. Marzocchi kicked down and sponsored me. You know, I had a bunch of different smaller sponsors. Raceface kicked in some clothing sponsors after I wrote for Roach Clothing for a while. So all of a sudden I was getting money that I'd never made before. And all of a sudden plane tickets was being offered all around the world and free trips everywhere. And people were sending us places to try and ride the gnarliest trails they could because Freeride was a new thing. And they wanted to see if we could ride their gnarly stuff. So we'd go to these places for free and actually getting paid. And we're free riding everywhere. And it was awesome. I was like a young kid who was used to making 15 cents a tree planting or paving, you know, on the side of the road, shoveling asphalt or whatever jobs I did. And all of a sudden I was getting paid to ride. And it was absolutely insane. It was a real treat. And I reveled in it. So I really enjoyed it.
And when big change comes to any industry, like in the beginning of that, when the executives at all these bike companies see Kranked, sometimes it's hard for the old school to embrace what the new school is, and you guys are the new school. I mean, you could look at it like you and your Freeride crew are the same as Craig Kelly and the Mount Baker hardcore to the mountain bike world. And how does the industry, they look at you like, oh, that's just a bunch of crazy kids and we're not going to make product for them? How does the industry look at what you're doing?
Well, there's a bit of both. You know, some people were set in their ways. Change is always inevitable in whatever you do. And at that time, we were the new school. And a lot of people were kind of like taken aback by it, you know. And I've seen people stuck in their ways. They didn't want front suspension. They didn't want rear suspension. They didn't want disc brakes. They didn't want dropper posts. You know, all these things all the way along. People got their heels stuck in. But then there's people who are totally into it. And they think it's rad. And they fully embrace it. And, you know, and photographers would jump on board and filmmakers all want a piece of the new school action, and riders and girls and everybody all the way around the circle in the scene would either be against it or with it. And I saw a lot of both. So I'm a pretty positive guy and pretty fun. So I just embraced the people that were into it and that wanted to come along. And there's the traditionalists and there's the innovators. And we were innovating at that time. And you got to break some eggs to make an omelet. And I realized that. And I'd seen it happen in different sports. I saw Crested Demons of Dirt happen with motocross. I saw things go from racing and snowboarding into free riding. I see it happen in skiing, you know, with Blizzard of Oz and Stumpy's movies kicking things down for the free ski scene more prevalently. And that's what was happening in mountain biking. And so I kind of realized what was happening. I tried to make as big a wave as I could and tried to be a part of it and tried to push as hard as I could and going bigger and steeper and faster. And it was exciting. I knew what was happening and I was loving it.
You were one of the original guys going fucking huge. You know, you could look at Josh Bender as the years come on, but in the beginning, the guy breaking a ton of bikes, the big guy, that was you in the mountain bike world.
That was me, yeah. I never heard of Josh Bender for many, many years. I was sending it in the 80s. I had some redneck friends, you know, and we'd be out there dropping gnarly steeps and doing, you know, we call them cliffs if they were taller than you or ledges if they were shorter than you.
Okay.
And so we're dropping ledges and some cliffs that were taller than us. And so on a bike with no suspension, with cantilever brakes, that was nuts back then. You drop a 7-8 footer that was taller than you.
Yeah.
That was nuts. And then it was into usually some steep hill where you go a million miles an hour. And then as suspension came on, you know, we were dropping 12-foot drops, 15-foot drops, 18-foot drops, 20-foot drops. And, you know, on Rampage now, they pack the takeoffs, they pack the landings. You know, when you land, you're not going to sink your front end. We didn't know about that. We just were just jumping into whatever was there, and it was raw bushes or deep sand or whatever. And sometimes you land and go right over the bars and do like 3 or 4 front flips. And so luckily me and my friends were tough because we ragdolled down a lot of hills back then for many years until we knew better of what to do and make it more easy to land and run out.
And at this point where mountain biking is taking off, what's happening with snowboarding? Because I think that probably fades into the background when you become a full-on rock star in the mountain bike world.
No, not yet. You know what? Like I was making money mountain biking, but I was still racing competitively snowboarding in 95, 96, 97. I was racing full-on GS as hard as I could in the winters and training. I was trying to be 1% better in every way I could. Like I would take months and months off drinking or doing anything fun just to like be strong. I was doing push-ups, sit-ups. I wasn't really lifting weights. I was doing it more natural. Sometimes I'd lift buckets of water or whatever when I was out in the woods. I didn't have any weights to lift or whatever. Or I'd get like big dudes to sit on my back and I would squat them when I was like working in the woods and stuff.
Weird.
Yeah, whatever I could do, you know, like every second night. I trained every second day as hard as I could go. I'd do 1 day off, 1 day off. And then I made the Canadian national snowboard team in the mid-90s. I was 4th in Canada for 3 years in a row. And in 98, I was trying to make the Olympics. And the top 4 of every country get to go. And I was 4th in Canada for 3 years in a row. And then the year that it counted, we had 4 time trials. And I got a 3rd, a 4th, a 6th, and a 10th. And so I just missed the 98 Olympics.
Oh.
Yeah, it pissed me off. It still pisses me off. Darren Chalmers took the 4th and final spot. JCG Anderson was another member on the team. Rossi Bagliati, who went on to win the gold medal, was on the team. And Mark Fawcett, who was winning the Olympics up until he blew his board and vibration plate off his board. And that was one of the biggest crimes in snowboard racing history of all time because he had won 6 races that year. And he was a buddy of mine, but also a mentor. And Mark Fawcett is the man. And I love his snowboard turns almost more than anyone ever. He shared a lot of knowledge. He took me under his wing and invited me into his house down in Hood River when he lived in Hood. And he taught me a lot and gave me great deals on boards when I needed them. And he really, really helped me out. And he's still helping me out. And he's still a good friend. And I think he should have won the gold medal, but he didn't. Ross, fair enough, won it.
Ross smoked him out.
Ross smoked them all. But hey, you know how many Canadians it takes to win a gold medal?
No.
1 in an eighth. How do you know when a Canadian does win a gold medal?
How?
They're the highest on the podium. But yeah, I was still snowboard racing heavily up to that time. And even though the Pro Rider thing was going on, I was still competitively racing World Cup and riding for Burton. And when I didn't make the 98 Olympics, I switched to snowboard cross. I still did some World Cup snowboard cross, and I did the Canadian Kokanee series and was getting, you know, some wins and a lot of podiums. Pretty much making the finals all the time in my hard boots. I was the only hard booter in the finals pretty much every time. And then in 2000, I won the Canadian Grand Nationals in Pro Protocross.
And you're like 35 at this point?
Yeah. Then I retired in snowboard racing after that. I was Canadian champ, and I was like, yeah, I've done this. Because mountain biking was taking off more and more. And after I won the Canadian Grand Nationals, I was like, okay, I've snowboard raced, and I'm making money mountain biking. I'm traveling around the world, and at that time, I was still going bigger and bigger. And I ended up, the biggest thing I dropped was a 25-foot cliff, which at that time was the biggest thing ever done and landed.
Yeah.
And then things started changing. Then Wade started jumping Marizuki trucks. Bender showed up and started hucking himself off things and eating it, but landing the occasional drop that was absolutely huge.
He's like the Seth Enslow of mountain biking, I feel like.
Yeah, exactly. And I actually filmed him do the jaw drop for New World Disorder 1. And New World Disorder NWD mountain bike series kind of took over from the Kranked series as the movie. And Derek Westerlund, who made the New World Disorder movies, was in Pulp Traction way back in the day. And my dad actually taught him in elementary school.
So Derek actually rode in the movie? I interviewed him once. I don't think I got that part out of him.
Yeah, I think he had a couple shots in there. He was actually one of the guys that was supposed to show up with Richie with the 2 Specialized M2 bikes and film with Richie after Richie did his 360, but he wasn't into dropping the steeps that Craig Olsen and I were dropping. And so I took his bike and got in Pulp Traction. Small world.
And where were we going with this?
So the New World Disorder movie started taking off, took over from Kranked. I was going the biggest until Bender showed up and started sending it. And then Wade started really hucking big. And then guys were doing like some stylish moves. And then there was the first Rampage. And then guys like Claw showed up, a BMXer, and he started doing, some stylier moves on the mountain bike. And Tyler Clausen Super T showed up the next year. And things were progressing. And that was kind of not my skill set with the BMX tricks going big and whatnot, right? I was like a straight hucker, dead sailors, maybe a little bar turn was about it. But things were progressing with the big air. I was still riding steep lines and steep chutes and stuff, but that was kind of out of vogue by then because it was all about hucking with some little tabletops and stuff,
Yeah, and things definitely changed. I would say that and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but 98 to 2004 were really the prime of your mountain bike days in terms of being a rider. And you were traveling a shit ton. You were a full-on rock star. And I would think everywhere you go, people want to buy you a drink and they want to hang out with you. And you have a big personality. And just growing up in Kamloops, I would think you start drinking beer and smoking weed at 12 years old. How did the whole partying thing start for you in the progression? Because I know it became a problem. We're not going to talk about it that much, but it's part of your life and we have to get through it. So when partying took over, when did it stop being fun?
I'd always enjoyed drinking beers with the guys and meeting people and stuff. And I definitely enjoyed my reefer at different times as well. But as like a popular rock star athlete or whatever you want to call me, I had a tough time with not entertaining people. Like I didn't want to ever let anyone down. I've heard that saying, you should never meet your heroes.
Yep.
I wanted to be that person that people did want to meet and were stoked they met. And if I would leave the Whistler Bike Park and there's a bunch of British dudes, a bunch of Kiwi dudes sitting there like, Tippie, and they'd give me a high five as I went by, I would sit down and have a beer with them and tell stories and jokes and ask them about their riding spots, end up partying down with whoever and whenever people I met. And it was tough not to, just because I love people, and I love partying.
And that's the lifestyle of this sport.
It's part of the sport, and people would buy you beers and give you different stuff that you never expected. And it just kind of would take on its own life sometimes these nights that you'd run into so many people. And living in Whistler, too, is tough for anybody because you're there and people come into town ready to party. So you party with them down. We're in town. Yay. And you go for it for 2 or 3 days while they're there. They take off. And then all of a sudden, a new set of friends or fans or whoever come into town. Hey, we're here for 3 days. Woo! And they go for it. And they blow all their money and then they leave. And then the next set of people come in and you're there all the time. And these people are coming in for their 3 or 4 day trips, going for it and expecting you to go for it. And you're going for it for 3 or 4 days at a time with every new set of friends that come into town. It's tough, right? And I actually would get a promo tab at a lot of bars down there because I was like deemed one of those people that were good for business. And so I never had to pay for booze. I'd walk in and be 2 beers and 2 shooters waiting for me whenever I walked to the bar. I'd throw $20 in the tip jar and they'd throw my money back at me. And I'd be like, oh God, So it was tough not to party all the time. And I love partying and I love people. So it was a real, putting out the fire with gasoline, and it got away with me and I messed it all up. I ended up partying hard and I ended up eventually trying hard drugs, and that's not something that I am really proud of in my life, but I did it and I went as hard as I could go, and I realized that that's not the way to go. It took me a long time to reel that in, and it's something that I wish I didn't do, but I did, and it took me a long time to get over it, but I did.
I think you look at your personality type. You do everything 110%. So if you get into a bad thing that is fun in the beginning, because I mean, nobody gets hooked on something because it sucks in the beginning. They get hooked on it because they had so much fun and they like doing it, and then it becomes a problem. But yeah, I think just your personality type, it's an addictive personality type when it came to snowboarding, when it came to mountain biking, but then it comes to partying too. You just have to cut that out at some point, but it takes a few years to figure that out.
That's for sure. And when you're doing this job, you're not responsible to go to work the next day. Back then, if you get into 2 or 3 movies, you're good. You do a few photo shoots, you're good. So now you have to do your daily Instagram. You have to do your online videos. It's a lot more structured now and a lot more work than it ever was back then as an early rock star in the sport. And there's not a lot to answer to. And so you could go and party for a week and no one's really going to notice. It was a recipe for destruction, really. And in these sports, a lot of kids learn their craft and they get really good and they get sponsored. And then all of a sudden they get thrown a whack of money and they're making 6 figures. And then all of a sudden there's no exit strategy when the new guy comes along and is doing one more twist, one more flip, going 10 feet bigger or whatever. There's no exit strategy. I think it's real tough for athletes who might not have that experience of how to deal with it. Some are strategic, some aren't, and some plan for the future, some don't.
In action sports especially, I mean, yeah, some are making 6 figures, but you're not making the real sport money, the team sport money. So when your career is done, your money's going to last 2-3 years, maybe, if you were smart.
Exactly, yeah. It's not like millions of dollars like basketball, baseball, or a lot of traditional team sports.
No, you're making the same as like a Tim Hortons manager.
Yeah, it's tough. And you'd think that the industry would pick up a lot of people who are within their own sport for marketing roles or whatnot. But that doesn't always happen all the time either. And so a lot of kids are left out in the cold, and a lot of them will take a path like I took or, be totally lost. And it's a real thing that happens quite often that people don't always know about or talk about.
Yeah, and I would say for you, getting yourself back, it's all your family that comes together. You end up going to rehab, and I'm sure there's some relapses after that. But you were able to get through the problem by about 2008 is when things start getting back to normal for you. You end up moving to Squamish with a bike and a desire to be sober and win over this girl that you fell in love with when you went up to Crankworks. And you do win her over, and then it sounds like you steal her car.
Yeah, that's a true story. She's across the room right now. Sarah, what do you have to say about that?
Well, he wasn't technically stealing. I lent it to him to go to a wedding. He just never returned it.
Okay.
It's just a minor change in that story.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. There was a couple rough starts, a few relapses. I really tested her and found out that she really did love me. And she's a diehard mountain biker from the 80s. She grew up by the Deep Cove bike store. And she watched the first mountain bikes in the world roll off into the store. She watched bicycles roll off into the store that were pre-mountain bike, like the Cook Brothers fat tired cruisers. And so she's like old school mountain biker. And we met at Crankworks, and she kicked my ass because I hadn't ridden for a few years. She kicked my ass on the mountain when the first time I went riding with her at the Whistler Bike Park, and I was like kind of blown away. And then I rode all week until I saw her again. We went on our date the next weekend, and I rode every day. And then when I finally saw her on the North Shore, she kicked my ass again down CBC at Double Black Diamond. And yeah, we fell in love. And then she lent me her car to go to a wedding, Dustin Adams' wedding, who was a Canadian downhill champ back in the day. And I never returned for a while. We ended up reeling it back in, and a number of things happened. My dad ended up passing away.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, thank you very much. I love my dad very much, and I was very close with him. And he had met my wife a couple times, which was awesome. And he ended up playing some guitar. She comes from a musical family, and he was quite musical. And he ended up singing her some songs, and we had a great time meeting. And he passed away. And right after that, I realized that Sarah and I were having a baby. And having that baby changed my life in that, I was doing construction work to help pay the bills. And once we had that little baby, I had a picture of her in my wallet that anytime I felt any temptation to use or get drunk or have a drink, I would pull that little picture out of her little face and I would be like, nope, not doing it. And I would just make my way home. And it was a real thing I had to do just to keep her going. And I did. And eventually I got laid off from work. So my wife was like fully into me shooting photos and whatnot. And I started shooting photos and I ended up getting more exposure than the whole Rocky team put together, shooting photos again with some traditional old steep technical lines and whatnot. People were like, where's this guy been? And I came on and I worked so hard that I really clawed my way back into being a pro athlete with all the exposure that I got.
Was it tough to convince some people that you weren't the Brett Tippie that they knew 3 years ago, that you had cleaned your shit up and it wasn't going to happen again?
Oh, yeah. There was a lot of doubters. And it was tough to convince people to pay me or to give me gear. And a lot of people just wouldn't trust me. And I had to work 10 times as hard just to be thought of as worthy. And there was new guys in the marketing departments that weren't familiar with me. And I was this old guy and there's a lot of ageism going on. So I had to work so hard to make it happen. And I did. And not only did I get the exposure in the magazines and whatnot, and a few little TV spurts that I still had a few connections with, but I also started doing some hosting for Kranked, which was getting bigger and bigger. And I was doing daily report videos. And back in the day, I had done a number of TV shows. I had hosted World Cup of Snowboarding for 4 years. And I had hosted another TV show, The Sacred Ride. And so I had years of experience of hosting television shows, which I used to host these online Crankworks daily reports. And it caught on, and Pink Bike had hired me. And Pink Bike at that time was the biggest mountain bike website in the world and still is.
Yep.
All of a sudden I was getting exposure online with these and then the magazine shots. And all of a sudden I was a legitimate pro athlete again / online video host. And at the same time, Facebook had started and was rolling, and my personality and experience and skill set totally lined up with doing online videos and social media and stuff. And so it started rocking and rolling, and all of a sudden I started picking up more and more sponsors, and I was so hungry to make up for lost time that I was like dropping cliffs and riding steeps and doing anything I could. And I was announcing from small events, big events, as much work as I could get, paid or unpaid, clawing my way back. And as the years went on, I was an undeniable force of nature and I wasn't going anywhere. And I always showed up for work on time and doing a good job. I basically earned my way back into the industry. It feels good and it's working.
Well, it's been a long road, I would say. Your story's a pretty awesome one because, like I said, like Craig Kelly and the Mountain Baker hardcore crew is what the Freeriders were to mountain biking. I think it's kind of a parallel of you guys were the pioneers of a sport and you're able to do that. So that's the end of the podcast because I know you need to get out. But there's one part that I actually close out with called Inappropriate Questions. Normally, I have one of your friends ask you 3 questions and I surprise you with them. I was going to do Derek Westerland, but I've done Derek for like 10 people and needless to say, I didn't get anybody to ask you inappropriate questions, so I'm going to do it. And the first one would be, have you ever been arrested?
Have I ever been arrested? I ever not been arrested? Dude, I've been arrested so many times, I can't even count. I don't remember the first time I was arrested, but probably the biggest time I got arrested was 2 weeks after Ross Biagliati won the gold medal in the Olympics and then lost his gold medal for them finding marijuana in his urine. I was on the Canadian national team racing in Lake Tahoe, and I went to go to Big Bear, and we drove through Nevada because it was a shortcut, and I got charged for internal possession for smoking in California and driving through Nevada with marijuana in my body.
Bad state to do it.
And I spent 5.5 days in jail because of that. Because back then, marijuana was a felony in Nevada. It's a misdemeanor and everywhere in the States. And so it went all around the world in newspapers, all around the world. Another Canadian national team snowboarder arrested for pot.
Oh.
Those horrible Canadian snowboarders. So it went global.
First picture I ever Googled of Brett, there was a newspaper article of him in a blue outfit with a waist chain in a court.
And handcuffs.
That was my first picture that popped up when I Googled him.
You must have been impressed.
She thought it was kind of badass, actually. She knew the story, but yeah, that was probably the biggest one. And I ended up saying to one of the reporters, I came on vacation, I left for Inappropriation, and that was most of the titles around the world in different newspapers and stuff.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So, inappropriate question number 2. You come from a town that is known for being a tough town, and I'm sure there's a lot of fights. And what's your most interesting fight story?
Oh, my God. You know what? I'm not much of a fighter. I'm a lover, not a fighter.
Sure.
But I come from a tough town, and the times I have fought, I've really hurt the person. I've knocked people out. It's nasty. I'm not really proud of it. At the same time, I don't like backing down. No one likes to back down when you're like an alpha type powerful dude, you know?
Yeah.
But I was lucky enough that I didn't have to do a lot of fighting because I was friends with some gnarly dudes. My friend, Big Jimmy Leonard, is like 6'6", 300 pounds.
That's huge.
Ron Jolliker's like 6'2", 280, and big, tough dudes with big sausage fingers. And they like scrapping. And those were my friends. You know, I did sports with those guys, but anyone ever mess with me, they mess with those guys. And those guys would mess you up. So I was lucky enough not to have to do a lot of scrapping. In some of my dark days, I've had a situation where I got baseball batted in the back of the head.
Jesus.
And I turned around and I saw stars in tunnel vision, but it went and left right away, just like it always did in a football hit. So then I ended up running the guy into the wall with the baseball bat and then ran him down the hall. And then I ended up choking him with the baseball bat until his tough guy buddy came running down the hall and threw me in the headlock or tried to throw me in the headlock. And then I ended up letting him have the headlock. And then I ended up taking their heads and smashing their heads together. And then the open wound in my head started pouring blood down on them. So they looked like a scene out of a horror movie. And then their tough guy buddy came running down the hall. And I just beat these two dudes up after they baseball batted me, or the one guy baseball batted me. So the third guy came running down the hall and I just looked up at him and I just growled at him. And he took off running. That just led to more of a legendary story about me. So then people wouldn't touch me after that because they thought I was like indestructible.
My final inappropriate question. You traveled with a bunch of crazy guys like yourself for a long time. There are probably plenty of crazy stories. I want the funniest one of you guys getting kicked out of a hotel, because whether you're jumping off the 5th floor balcony into the pool or doing whatever, I know athletes can piss off people at hotels for some reason and have to find a new room.
Oh, wow. Well, we got in trouble one time, and it wasn't even that long ago. My friend Richie Slay had picked up a girl at Eurobike, and he was like, hey, dude, I need the bedroom. And me and Jeff Gulovich were staying in the room, and we're like, dude, whatever. We're not going anywhere. Like, you know, we were tired and we'd just traveled there overseas and stuff. And he had this hot blonde German girl that he had picked up. And so he's like, well, okay. So he said to her, he goes, hey, let's just fool around in my car. And so she's like, well, okay, that is okay with me then. And so he goes, Tippie, when you get up to the room, throw down a couple pillows and a blanket. And I was like, okay. And so we got up to the 3rd or 4th floor or whatever it was of this hotel. Me and Gully got up there and I threw down, you know, the pillows and blankets to him, and he's waiting down in the parking lot and he had an SUV. And so I'm like, oh, screw it. So I grabbed the mattress off his pull-out couch and I threw down the mattress too. But he had already run back to the car and didn't realize that there was a mattress that floated down and landed in the parking lot. I'm looking out the window and there's a mattress out in the parking lot. So I ran downstairs. They still had their clothes on. And I knocked on the window and I'm like, hey, I got a mattress for you. He's like, I don't want a mattress. There's not enough room. And I'm like, yes, there's, it'll fit. And he's like, no, there isn't. And I'm like, yes, there is. And he's like, no, there isn't. So I'm trying to shove this mattress in the back door of this SUV. And he's pushing the mattress out. So eventually I just grabbed him and pulled him out of the vehicle. And I offered my hand to her and she stepped out of the vehicle. I threw the mattress in. I grabbed him, threw him in, handed her in, closed the door and went up to bed. And then in the morning, he's sneaking back into the hotel with the mattress and he gets busted by the hotel staff with her. So he's getting busted. Then all of a sudden the door opens and all our sponsors and all our bosses are standing there. So not only did he get busted by the hotel staff, but the bosses of our sponsor, I think it was Spank Components. And they actually thought it was pretty cool. But there he was with this hot blonde sneaking back in with a hotel with a mattress. And then she came up to me and she said, thank you very much, Tippie, for that. Because you know what? I had a mountain bike crash. I have raspberries all over my body. And the mattress was much nicer for the love last night.
That is perfect.
Yeah. Anyways, there was a quick story of some hotel interaction and getting in trouble.
Well, Brett, I want to thank you for your time, man. You have a legendary story and peaks and valleys in it for sure. And you're up on a peak now and you're going to keep that going. And I just want to say thank you and have a great day in Whistler.
Well, I thank you for your time and taking me on the Mike Powell Report. Or what do you call it?
The Powell movement. It's kind of a poop joke, like a bowel movement.
Oh, the Powell movement. Hey, with friends like that, who needs an enema?
Exactly. That's how we're going to end it.
Hey, did you know that diarrhea is hereditary?
No.
It runs in your genes.
I'm guessing you have a whole lot of dad jokes.
It stinks around here because we're the shit.
Well, my tagline is time to talk shit.
Oh, there you go. I love it. Perfect. That's awesome. Well, thanks very much for having me, Mike. Awesome. Hope everyone enjoyed the stories out there. And make sure you follow more Powell movements.
So that was time with Brett Tippie. And man, that dude is a ball of energy. I can't imagine what it was like when he took something that gave him even more energy. You would think a guy wired like that would just explode. But Brett was able to turn his life around and get back into the spotlight. And you don't see that very often in the world today. Someone totally disappearing off the face of the earth for a few years in the name of addiction and then coming back to the level of where Brett is at. While people do get themselves clean all the time, when you're in the spotlight, everyone knows about your issues. And in order for Brett to become one of the faces of mountain biking again, he needed to convince a lot of people that he was better and he had overcome his issues. And his one-track mind and go 100% all the time mentality now has him pointed in the right direction, and Brett Tippie is back to riding gnarly lines and shining behind the mic. A total turnaround for an absolute legend, and that's the podcast for this week. I want to thank you for listening. Ask you to email me with any questions or concerns that you have. My email is mike@thepowellmovement.com, and I will get back to you. And finally, I want to thank my sponsors. They are Evo, Spy, Stanley, and the 10 Barrel Brewery. Have a great week, everyone.